All right, guys, welcome back to the Adoptology Podcast. Today, I have my youth pastor, good longtime friend of mine, great mentor of mine, and I brought him onto this podcast because this episode is called "Twice Chosen," and it's because his story. He's been adopted, and he's adopted before. He has a son, David. I work with him a lot. He's a great kid. I brought him on here to show you how it's like to go from being adopted and then going to adopted. Because I want to adopt kids. I want to adopt kids from Haiti when I grow up. I want to adopt kids when I get married. So this is mostly for me too, but this is for you guys. So he's gonna teach you the process of being adopted and then adopted. So and you've been adopted, and then you've adopted before. Well, it's like being it's like being a coach and a player at the same time. So like,
Right.
what is that like?
I mean, in some ways, like it's really cool because you walk through a lot of the things that you walk through as a kid with your own kids. But it's also my adoption story and my kids' adoption stories are so different. Like every adoption story is different. Like, and you know that. And so it is really cool to be able to be on both sides of it. But it's also everything's so different on it that it gives you a perspective. Like being adopted is going to give you that perspective of what it's like to be chosen by someone and all of that. And you kind of understand what your kids are going through if they're adopted. But at the same time, there are circumstances and emotions that are unique to them that I can't understand. That in some ways is even more frustrating because I feel like I should understand. I feel like I should be able to relate to them better. But I've learned that just because we've gone through the same experience or similar experience, it wasn't the same. And so just be able to love them. And that's really what it comes down to is love them the way that I was loved and just kind of do my best. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we're about to get into your origin story. You get to talk about yourself now. So can you walk us through your adoption story as a child? How was that like?
Yeah. So both my parents died when I was young. My dad died when I was 3 years old, and then my mom died when I was 9. And that whole thing, it was difficult to go through as a kid. You know, growing up without a dad, really, I don't remember my dad. I remember stories that my mom told me about my dad and what other people told me about my dad. But I don't remember anything like personal. There's no first person memories that I have of my dad. And so that was hard, but my mom loved me as best she could. We had like nothing. We lived off Social Security checks. And so for the entire time I can remember, she may have had one job while I was growing up. But other than that, we lived off Social Security checks. My favorite meal growing up was the microwave burritos from the grocery store. Like that was like the treat. I was like, this is it.
Oh yeah, I love those burritos.
And anyway, then when I was 9, she died. And so my aunt and uncle, who didn't have any kids of their own, they adopted me. And they took me in and I became their kid. And it was hard. Like there's no sugarcoating it. I went from my mom who really had no rules. I mean, it was like she operated off feelings and like I said, she loved me and she'd tell me that all the time, but there were really no rules.
No structure.
And if I wanted something, if I threw a big enough fit, even if we didn't have the money, like she would do what she could to try to get it for me. And so there was, it was a little bit of that. And then I went to my aunt and uncle where it was very structured. Everything was rules. And it was like I went from someone who lived with their heart to people that live with only their brains, right? Like that's what it felt like. And they even told me early on, their goal was to raise me so that I would not become like my parents, which as a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, I resented that. But now on the other side of that, I come to understand what they really meant and how much they loved me about it. It wasn't malicious towards my parents, but they genuinely didn't want me to go down the same road that led to all of the suffering that they experienced in life. And so I get that. Anyway, so 9 years old, both my parents died. My aunt comes and picks me up. I go to live with them. And that's really what it became, just kind of figuring out totally different ways of living life. And then just walking through that, right? Like as a kid, trying to understand what it's like to live with someone who's not your parents. I had no brothers or sisters. I had no context for that. And then even as I got older, being challenged by my uncle and the way that he thinks and the way that he approaches life and even faith. Because from the time I moved in, my aunt took me to church. And so I grew up after 9, started going to church. But even then, like my uncle just challenging me with, how to think about things, how to really question. And a lot of the things that I initially struggled with and was frustrated with and angry with about them have really shaped who I am today. I think I think about things the way I do in a lot of ways because of my aunt and uncle. And the way they raised me and what they do, and that helped a lot, for our story with our kids. But I mean, that's really kind of how my adoption story unfolded. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And the following question is that, like, what do you remember feeling as a kid around adoption? Like, known, confused, chosen?
Yeah, and I'll say confused is one for sure, but not mostly confused because of losing my parents and just being confused on feeling like, why did this have to happen to me? But in terms of my aunt and uncle taking me in and adopting me, it was hard because I knew why they did it. I knew why they took me in. I knew that they loved me, but on the other side of that, they never fully adopted me, which was because they left it up to me, which I don't think I really understood that until much later. So technically they were my guardians. They never fully adopted me. So I kept my last name, Followell. I didn't take their last name. And a lot of that was, again, they were trying to give space for me to figure things out, but I wasn't aware that they were doing that out of care and love for me. I never really explored what it would be like to be adopted by them. I wish I had, as a young kid, I wish I would have had those conversations. And I probably could have asked more questions, but I just never did. And they never really brought up those conversations. So I knew I was loved and I knew that. But at the same time, there was also that part that felt like I was missing something because it was like I went to live with them because my parents died, but I know that they chose me. Now let me kind of fast forward and skip a whole bunch of things. But when I got married on my wedding night, at the reception you do the dances, right? The bride and her dad, and then the groom and his mom. And I did not tell my aunt that I was going to do that. She actually didn't even. It wasn't even on her radar that I was going to dance with her that night. But I wouldn't not do that. I mean, she's my mom. So when that happens, like they play the song and I go over and she even had to it was like she had to realize, oh wait, this is for me. And so I get her out and we start dancing and I start to thank her for adopting me and for taking me in and knowing that what they did was a big deal. And it was in that moment that she shares to me for the first time, not that she was trying to hide it from me, but she shared with me that they couldn't have kids. And when I was born, she prayed Hannah's prayer about me almost every night because she knew God told her that she would eventually raise me. So for 9 years, like she prepared and knew that she was going to be my mom. And she did become my mom, but it wasn't until I was like 24, 23 when I got on my wedding night that she tells me that. Right. So, but
Really cool.
I'll say what that meant for me is it kind of felt like, even though I was adopted when I was 9, it was almost like my adoption was completed when I was married, like that day.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. You actually answered the next question I was gonna ask. I'm just gonna skip it. But yeah, that's a really great story to hear. The full circle, just coming back to realize that it all comes back down to love and a choice. You said they left it open. They left it up to you. They didn't make you. They didn't want to just make you their parent. They wanted you to, they wanted you to accept that. And I think that's awesome because I was talking about that on one of the last podcasts I did was my parents invited me to be in their family. They asked me to be in their family. They didn't just pluck me out the orphanage. They came to me and said, "Would you like to be my parent? Would you want to be in our family?" And call this mom and dad. I'm like, "Yeah, for sure." It was like it felt like I was invited in and not just like an obligation. So I do. Right. That is. Thank you for saying that. Yep. Okay, so we're about to enter into a hard questions segment. Like I said, those questions were hard. They're about to get harder. Are you ready? All right. Number 1. How has being adopted yourself shaped the way you parent your adopted children?
Yeah, I mean, and I kind of touched on it a little bit at the beginning. I think there are parts of that where it helps give me a window, right, to see and understand what they're going through. And so I do think that gives me a compassionate side to me. Sometimes I lean towards maybe over compassionate, where it's easier for me to come alongside and understand their emotions. But I think sometimes I need to have better boundaries on that. Yeah. And so I think being adopted and having adoptive children, there's a fine line between allowing yourself to go back into that feeling of what it was like for you to be adopted, to also recognizing you're a parent. And even though your children are adopted, you still have to have really good boundaries for them. And sometimes they're just not going to understand you. The adoptive side of me wants to make sure that they understand all of the purposes and things of why we're doing what we're doing. And honestly, sometimes kids just don't need that. And so as far as like how it's changed the way I parent, I mean, I've had to adjust myself, like recognize that I can relate to them, but I still have to be their parent. I can't just be another adoptive person that's like, oh yeah, I know what it's like to be adopted. Let's sit in those emotions all the time. But I have to get out of those emotions, and I have to recognize that emotions inform us, but emotions can't be the only form of communication or way of learning. You know, sometimes we have to divorce emotion and say, look, I understand that right now you're struggling with this, and here's why, but here's the consequence, or here's the rule, or here's the boundary. And that's hard. That's really hard for me, because I want to be that person that's like, oh no, I remember what it was like when my adopted parents, said this and I didn't understand it and I got real angry. I understand that. I want to put myself in that situation. But in the end, I also have to recognize, well, what they did, even if I don't never understood it, they had a purpose and a reason for it. And they're the parent, and I was the kid. Now I'm the parent, and my kids are the kids. And so I've still got to be able to parent them well. So it's a fine line, right? Kind of a balance between those two sides.
Thank you for that. It actually just made me think a lot. Okay, question 2. Do you ever feel tension between gratitude and grief, both as an adoptee and as a parent?
Absolutely. And I'll go ahead and, one of the things I didn't share in the first part of adoptive story is, I was adopted, but then after we got married, my wife and I had only been married for a year. And then, we'd only been married a year. We weren't even out of the honeymoon phase.
That was a big decision there.
Yeah. And our apartment complex manager, he had 2 boys. One was 10. His name was Brandon. One was 18 months old, and he was David. And she was taking care of them, single mom. They were her nephews, and she just couldn't do it anymore. And after a series of different things, CPS was involved, other family members were involved. Eventually, they literally moved into our 2-bedroom student housing apartment at Baylor, and they never moved out. I mean, that's literally what happened. They moved in. It was supposed to be for a weekend, and then that turned into a week, and then that turned into the next week. And then we just said, do you want them to just stay here? And they said yes. Like, their family said, yes, we want you to keep them. And so that was when we started wrestling with the process of what's the official way for us to adopt these boys. Yeah. Well, it wasn't even adoption at first. It was just, what do we need to do legally? Because at this point we were like glorified free babysitting.
Yeah.
And so our adoption process for our kids was really backwards. We ended up going and getting a legal aid from a church. They helped us write up adoption documents. We met with their biological parents, and we had lunch with them, and we explained to them that summer we were going to Greece for school for 2.5 months for an internship, because we thought we were going to be missionaries. Like, that was we were going to go overseas, be missionaries. So we had this trip planned, met with the parents, said, hey, for us to take the boys out of the country, we need custody. Here's custody documents. We're asking, if you have any questions and what this means. And then you would sign these documents. We'd have custody of them. And that means we would be able to make legal decisions, all of those things. But we also were very clear that if they signed those documents, what it meant was that these kids would never be given away again. And they said, well, what do you mean? And we said, what that means is if you wanted your kids back, you will have to go to court.
Yeah.
And you will have to fight for them and win. We would hope that you do. Mm-hmm. That was our greatest hope, was that their parents would recognize that what was going on, change their life circumstances, and ultimately do that. Mm-hmm. And eventually they signed the documents, gave us custody. So they had visitation once a week. Each parent would come for an hour. It was really weird. It's like we went through a divorce with their parents. And so they would visit. And then after 2 years of living like that, where we had custody of the boys, Brandon was about 12 at the time. He asked us if we would adopt him. We had been talking about that. He knew from the beginning that we were open to it.
Yeah.
And so we started having, and he asked if we could adopt him, but he had 2 questions. One, if he adopted us, or if we adopted them, would he get to see his biological family again? And we were very clear that as long as we felt like we could trust them and that they would be in a safe place, then their biological family would always be included, just like extended family of a biological kid, right? If we have if there's an aunt or uncle of our biological son, it's the same conditions, right? Like if we feel like we can trust them and we know them and we love them and they're in a safe place, then great. But not everybody's that way. So that was kind of our boundary. And then his second question was, do I get to be a follow-up? And they're like, what do you mean? He's like, can I have your last name? And that was what Brandon wanted. If we adopted him and his brother, he wanted to be able to see his family again, if it was okay, and to change his name. And so that was what we did. So we decided to do that. And then July 13th, 2012, the same summer we moved here to San Marcos and all of the things in our life changed. That was when we officially adopted Brandon and David. And so in terms of all of that, like, what was the actual question?
I was about to ask myself the same question, but yeah.
Okay.
Did you ever feel tension between gratitude and grief, both as an adoptee and as a parent?
Yes. The reason I wanted to explain that is because that adds context.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Even when I first adopted our boys, felt a lot of tension between that because I lost my parents.
Yeah.
And that's why I was ultimately adopted by my aunt and uncle. And then so much gratitude to know that God had prepared my heart to be willing to be ready for Brandon. Like, so Brandon went to live with his aunt when he was 9. I went to live with my aunt when I was 9, right? Like there was all these parallels that immediately brought us together, even before they ever came to live with us. And then when that door opened, it was like our heart was totally open to what God was doing. And so we said, absolutely. But even in the midst of taking in these boys and being full of gratitude of what God had done, there was still this grief of like, still a reminder that my parents would never be here to see this. And my parents would never know, the kind of man that they raised. And so then what that did is that really did for us, our heart was, yes, we took in the boys, we loved them, but we also prayed for it and everything we could do to help their parents is something that we really felt passionate about. And then further down the story, just a couple of years ago, Brandon would have been 23, died in a car accident. And so talking about gratitude and grief through the adoption process, God has done all these crazy things and weaving our story together of, me losing my parents and then being adopted and then providing a way for us to adopt kids that are in a similar situation, similar story. And then at the same time now walking through the loss of a son, one of, my oldest adopted son, the one that genuinely the first time I ever felt like a dad was with Brandon and with David. And so all of these things like gratitude and grief are like daily companions for me. Grief ambushes you, but gratitude helps you stay grounded. Gratitude is that daily discipline of thanking God for what he's done. And that brings peace in the midst of grief. And so that absolutely exists. But yeah, for me, I would say gratitude and grief are, like I said, daily companions. They're things that I walk through and walk with, but would never ask for it to be a different way. Like what God has done in my life has been a story that I could have never imagined. And there are things that I wish could be different, but at the same time, I trust God and I know that he's doing some awesome things. And I'm just happy to be a part of what he's doing.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. That's really awesome. Like, I really hope you guys take his story and just process it in the way you think you should process it, but really try to pinpoint on what works for you, because not everything is gonna hit. But thank you for sharing that. Yep. And to lead on to the next question about in religion. So you're a pastor, you're my youth pastor. Has being a pastor influenced the way you see the word chosen, spiritually, emotionally, and practically? Yeah, I mean,
I can't think of the word chosen without what it means to be chosen by God. I mean, even from a young age. So at 9 years old, I accepted Christ, and that has, chosen is so much deeper because of how God orchestrated my life, being chosen by my aunt and uncle, being taken in, and then choosing my kids, right? It's very much there's spiritually, right? I can recognize God chooses us and there's a plan and there's a path, but emotionally, I also recognize that sometimes it's more complicated than that. Yes, I know I was chosen, but I still felt hurt because I lost my parents. I know my kids were chosen, but they still felt hurt because they lost so much. I know God has chosen a lot of things in my life, but I feel hurt because I lost my son. Like but I recognize that emotionally. Like I also know emotionally, like it helps me when I'm struggling. When I have so many doubts about my own path, my life, even my desires. Like when I struggle to fall back on and recognize and know that I'm chosen. It's a. I mean, I don't even know how to wrap that up, except that I don't know that it's that adoptive people understand the word chosen better. I don't think that's the way to say it, but I think they understand the word chosen differently.
Yeah. Because I certainly do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly do. It is a choice. Being chosen is being wanted, is being invited, is being welcomed.
Yep.
By some entity or people who don't even have to do that.
That's right.
So like I do that does resonate with me different. It's very different than picking your teammates while you're about to play football or dodgeball. So yeah, after people do it, they don't understand any better, like you said, but it is different. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the way I'm trying to think of the way Monica would explain it to David when he was really, really little, it was that how did she I can't remember. It was a really simple like explanation of like essentially that even though she
You can call her right now.
Did I wake you up? Okay. How was it that you explained to Brandon and David? There was like that you had that saying. It was like even though like they weren't born, it was your heart. Like I can't remember something about heart chosen. How did you explain that to him? Do you remember what I'm talking about? I'm not crazy. Okay. Yeah, okay. So yeah, it was just that idea of being chosen, even though they weren't born like from like they aren't our biological kids. They were chosen from our heart.
Yeah.
And that's what made it so deep. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Monica.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mom would always say I was her longest pregnancy because my adoption process took 3 years. So I can resonate with that.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Well, yeah, thank you. Bye, Asher.
All right. Okay.
Oh, yeah, that was awesome. Okay, next question. What do you say to people who romanticize adoption without seeing the pain?
Slow down. Slow down. We've had several people who had talked to us about adoption and the process. And the first thing I always start with is it is so hard. It's so hard. Even from somebody that has been adopted, like that when it is still so difficult. And you have to recognize that when you decide to adopt, it's different than deciding to have a child. It's just different because like she said, I mean, it is the process of building that attachment and doing everything after they're born is 100 times harder. And it just takes longer.
Yeah.
And so it's a lifelong commitment, and so often we aren't honest, I think, with everyone on the outside of what the adoption process and what adoption looks like. And the wins and the successes all seem like so awesome because of course, like when someone adopts someone, often that's, we make posts about it. We're so happy and there's all the happy pictures and all of those things. But when the adoptive kid is, literally destroying half of your house or almost setting your house on fire or throwing things at you, you don't take pictures or video that. You don't post that on social media.
Well, I've been there. I've broken a lot of stuff.
I know.
Hey, we're gonna get that later. But I do that. I know that.
Yeah. So that I would just say that you slow down. That's not to say that you shouldn't do it. I really believe everyone should consider adopting. Everyone should consider adopting. Absolutely. But at the same time, if they're not willing to literally make their entire life about that child, I mean, even more than it should be the same case with biological kid. Yeah. The thing is, when you have a biological kid, that happens naturally. Yeah. He's your flesh and blood. Yeah. But when you are adopting someone, they're not your flesh and blood, actually biologically. You have to be willing to give up part of yourself, and as they give up part of themselves so that you can become flesh and blood. And that's a struggle outside of the womb that is literally a battle. Yeah. And we just don't, I think we just don't talk about that enough. Yeah.
That's real. That's real. Thank you for saying that. Okay. So what are your thoughts on the phrase God's plan when it comes to adoption? Comforting or complicated?
It's definitely comforting for me. I look back on it and look back on my life, and there are still times where I wrestle with. I wish my mom and my dad could still be around. I wish my mom could have seen, or my dad could have seen things that I've the man I've become and all those things. But I still look back and I can see God's hand on every part of my life and the story that He's woven together. And particularly with my aunt and uncle taking me in, and us taking in Brandon and David, and that brings me great comfort to know that God has been a part of it from the beginning and always will be.
That's real. That's real. Okay. This last question is,
Yep.
what's something you're still healing from in your own story?
I think I'll always be healing from the loss of my mom. She, for most of my life, like I said, from the time I was 3 until I was 9, I know she had a job maybe once or twice, but for the most part, I mean, we were just together all the time. And so to have that ripped from me when I was 9 years old was devastating. And then there's still parts of that'll never be fully healed. But also losing Brandon 2 years ago is, I mean, the hardest loss that I've ever had. I mean, harder than losing my mom. And so that'll be another wound that is just continually healing for the rest of my life. But that's where I just continue to rely on God and continue to practice gratitude to help with those moments of grief, and then just trust God as we move forward.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I know for a fact that a big part of my story and what God has done and who I am can go back to even my grandma, because she prayed for me every day from the time I was born, right? Like just prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. And then the same with my aunt, right? Like she knew that God was going to somehow put me in her family to be raised by her. My mom, alcoholic, drug addict, like struggling with those things. I can remember a memory. I mean, like first person memory of me sitting in a cab with my mom. And I don't remember if it was us coming back from a hospital or if it was just me having that conversation. I was probably maybe 6. And I recognized she had asthma and she was a chain smoker. Mm-hmm. And I knew that it was killing her. And I told her, I was like, Mom, you need to stop smoking. And her answer to me was, well, I would stop smoking, but I can't because I can't stop drinking. And anytime I drink, I smoke. And as a 6-year-old, like, how do you argue with your mom about that? Yeah. And so I was just kind of like, okay, but in a real way, like that was a generational curse that was in my family. And I believe that God, at least partially, put me in the family I'm in with my aunt and shaped my life in a way to help break that curse. Brandon and David come from a line of also alcoholics and family members that struggle with drug abuse and all of those things. And so now I've come out of that. I'm raising David to hopefully break out of that, who then will raise another generation of family that will not have to touch that. Right. And so that's kind of the way I think about it in terms of like healing generationally. And so there are things that I recognize that my parents struggled with, and I know that I could struggle with them. But my hope and prayer is that if I am able to live in a way that surrenders to God and has victory over that, that my kids won't have to. And so that's how I think about that. When the Bible talks about generational sin or curses, I don't know, that's what I think about is whether it be drug abuse or alcoholism or things in our family histories that follow us. There have to be points where those things are broken. And had my parents not died and I not been adopted, and then had Brandon and David's circumstance not been such that they had to move out of their parents' house, right? It's very possible that I'm still walking in that generational curse of alcoholism and drug abuse. Yeah. And same with them, right? And so now God has allowed adoption to be that place, that point where things can change and move differently for me and then for my kids. Yeah,
that's real, because that's actually the subject that's been recurring a lot in my talks with a lot of people on podcasts and outside of podcasts.
Yeah.
And my dad said something really profound when the previous episode I had with him was he used to have anger issues, and then he realized how that was affecting him and his family. And then once he changed, everybody else changed. Because I remember when he had his anger issues, I had anger issues stem off of that. I started having the same kind of spits, and I was very prone to what I picked up from them because everything is new here for me. Everything is new here from 10-year-old boy from Haiti. So when he changed and decided to make this fix for himself, he went to therapy and everything. I started changing. Our relationship got better. We're like besties. We're like twins. It's just when he made that change, it affected the whole family. Yeah. The whole family's better. Our family wasn't always too keen on mental health until those changes happened. Now my mom is getting a counselor. She's about to get another EMDR, big in it. They give us mental health days in high school and all of that. It's just like when a parent decides to make that change and break a cycle, it carries on forever. It carries on. The trait becomes easier for the kid to adapt to it, to adapt to change, to adapt to getting better. And that's why I saw a video on Instagram recently. It was if a mother has to, for during her pregnancy for 9 months, has to do all this medicine, has to do all these things, has to pay attention to all of this, a man 9 months prior to that should take the time to work out, to study things, to take medicine, to eat healthy, to not drink, to not smoke, to not do anything negative that could impact the baby. So I'm just like, okay, that really resonated with me because everything is encoded in your DNA. Everything is genetics, from thoughts, addiction to everything. And like once you make that change, it affects your whole generation. It affects the whole bloodline. Because like my history, my medical history from Haiti, I don't know it. I don't know what traits are easier for me to adapt to than others because I don't know it. So I have to be extra careful for my future kids and what I do. Like I have this one pain on my side that comes every November that my parents have been trying to figure out what happens. What is it? Like we still don't know what it is. So like I'm still trying to figure out. There's a new stuff I notice about my body every other day, every other month. So like I got to take care of myself. I got to control what I do. I got to control how much I drink. I got to control the things that I partake in because I don't know my history. I don't know my past, but it has to start with me. So that's why I do really resonate. So I want to say thank you for saying that. But yeah, thank you for coming on here. Cool. Can't wait to have you back. The son David wanted to be on here. I'll say he has to talk to you and y'all can do it together. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Want to say bye? Yep, thanks for listening. And I do hope that something about my story that resonates, and I hope it helps you guys. But thanks for having me, Wilson. Thank you. Bye, y'all. Send me $1 million.